As I have grown up, I've been gradually becoming more aware of the things that influence who I become in later life. Things like family, school, work experience are all obvious things that can have a drastic impact on a young person's development. However, the content that we consume in our youth has a huge role to play. When I was younger, I was obsessed with whole histories. Now, if you're unaware of this show because you're American, it was a long-running live-action sketch show that had various segments all based on history, and this was a show for kids. Many of the segments were parodies of existing show formats like X Factor, things like MasterChef and Iron Chef, and other cooking shows, medical dramas like Casualty or, Grey's Anatomy, detective crime shows, school dramas, and even things like infomercials and the news. All of these were crammed full of historical facts that would be validated by the host, Ratus, a talking rat crawling through the sewers of time. Now I think about it, the show was a bit weird. The show actually had such a profound impact on my later childhood years. It gave me a massive interest in history, as well as shaping my sense of humour that I have. Taking this nostalgia trip led me to think about other influences that have made me the giga chad that I am today. So of course I looked at some of my favourite movies. Movies like Fight Club made me a super tough Sigma male. Movies like The Dark Knight made me an anarchist who hates society and believes in bringing everyone to their knees. And movies like The Wolf of Wall Street made me realise that I really, really, really love tits. Movies make us who we are, which makes directors the sculptors. Which got me thinking, what makes directors like Scorsese, Tarantino, Fincher and Nolan so famous and influential, not only in the cinema industry, but influential to us as people? So after viewing a fair few of their movies, I thought I'd go over each of these big name directors and say what makes them who they are, and as well as giving my thoughts on what could make anyone a great filmmaker. Now I am only going to be going over a few directors because if I went over every big director we'd be here for fucking hours. Of course, if we talk about cinema, you have to start with one of the old Italian goats. Scorsese has made some of the most iconic movies of all time. Movies like Taxi Driver, The King of Comedy, The Irishman, The Wolf of Wall Street, and many, many others. One thing that I really think sticks out about Scorsese is the variety in his work. I mean, of course he has his iconic sets of mob action thrillers like Goodfellas and Casino, but then he has more psychological thrillers like Shutter Island and Bring Out the Dead. Then he has his movies that seem more like comedies in The Wolf of Wall Street and After Hours. Yet, despite all this, Scorsese manages to stay in a position where you can identify all his work from someone else. This is due to what defines all good directors and the reason I'm making this video, and that is his identity. Throughout all his movies, Scorsese has had years to find a style that best worked for him in his films. Scorsese's identifying identity is his hyper-focus on character. Martin Scorsese chooses stories that have an interesting character who has several flaws, and then focuses on those flaws in close-up, intimate, personal framing, in a way that makes you feel sorry for the character and allow you to relate to them in a deeper and more profound way than you would with any other director. He also chooses to elevate this by using the location of the story to highlight the difficulties the character has. Things like the grimy streets of New York City or the corrupt world of Wall Street, or he almost uses the character as a mirror for the environment that they're in, then uses that as a way of reflecting the character's issues onto the viewer. This is what Scorsese represents as a filmmaker and by proxy what he also represents as a man. Real world people with real world struggles told in an intimate, personal and sympathetic way. Scorsese wants the viewer to view his work through the eyes of the protagonist and ask themselves as to whether they would become better than the protagonist or whether they would become just as corrupt as the individuals within the story. So we've touched on realism, now it's time to move to the other side of the spectrum. It's not just Scorsese who's made some great movies. Nolan's got some classics too, like Interstellar, Inception, Memento, and some of these Batman movies that kind of flew under the radar, to be honest. I don't know if I've ever talked about them before. If Scorsese focuses on intimacy and character, Nolan is definitely more about size and spectacle. I mean, some of the shots in this guy's movies are stunning. Nolan's movies are usually about huge sci-fi concepts, like in the case of an Interstellar and Inception. But even for his more down-to-earth movies, Nolan still manages to put his signature identity into this movie. The best way to identify a Nolan movie is by the use of time and how the movie is paced. Nolan experiments with time to a certain degree. Like, you've got Tenet, which has time going forwards then backwards. Memento, where the story is told front to back and back to front at the same time. Inception, where time passes at different rates depending on the level of the dream that the characters are in. Dunkirk, where the story is told jumbled up with different points of view just for a bit of added spice. And The Dark Knight, where the time is just, this is fucking awesome. The movie's fucking awesome. I can't keep it in. I fucking love it. Nolan's use of time helps to keep the story interesting. You know, there's always a level of uncertainty around the protagonist and the story as a whole when it's a Nolan movie, because you never know what's going to happen next, because even though the events seem like they could happen in a logical order, it could all of a sudden cut to another scene where something else is happening and then cut back later and you'll never understand. And they usually are tied together at the end in a nice little ribbon, which always works really nicely. This identity helps him to create stories that can help reflect what he looks for as a filmmaker and what helps him stand out as a filmmaker. You know, this whole uncertainty keeps you drawn in. Scorsese keeps you drawn in with character. Nolan keeps you drawn in with a level of uncertainty and a level of wonder. And there's always a theme of time being a crucial factor, whether that's from the Dark Knight trilogy to Interstellar to Inception. Time is always one of the most crucial factors in all of his stories. They never have enough time, which is something that I think we could all relate to in life, because we never have enough time to do anything. It always feels like there's never enough time in the day, and that's something that I think is very impactful in Nolan's work, is that there's just never enough time.
Everything's gonna be fine.
The Finchmeister. Daddy David, Big D. Fincher has a lot of iconic movies. This guy has made some of my favourite movies of all time. Fight Club, Gone Girl, The Social Network, and many, many others that all have the signature Fincher identity. Fincher's identity is one of the most noticeable, as it jumps out of the screen in every single movie of his. Fincher's most iconic cinematic tool is his use of colour. Fincher always colour coordinates his scenes to such an intense level, some may label him as obsessive, I think is maybe the way to describe it. Fincher never likes his backgrounds to be full of colour. He likes the backgrounds to be one colour, usually yellow as it's warm, but not so bright as to become distracting. Characters within the scene are usually in centre frame, wearing colours that could contrast with everything else in the scene to help them stand out. This colour coordination and then contrast helps to certainly direct the viewer's focus on whatever the character is highlighted within the scene. You know, and this helps the viewer to be more invested in that specific character and what they have to say and do. Fincher is all about subtlety in his movies. He never has huge swooping camera movements. He never has huge brightly coloured landscapes. He always keeps things neutral, so when something breaks this pattern, it could be immediately identified as important. This all helps in the type of story that he typically chooses to turn into a film. He tells stories that all rely on deception. So Fincher attempts to use still frames to convey a sense of uneasiness, a bland colour in order to deceive the viewer into believing the narrative that he is trying to push. And then again, when everything is revealed, you usually get more warm colours, like in the case of Seven, Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. The colour palette usually changes to meet Fincher's will, to relay how the viewer should be feeling at a certain time.
SK Billy's super sounds of the 70s weekend just keeps on trucking. Yeah. Looking back on a track for a little greenback.
Now, one thing that immediately stands out about Tarantino is his dialogue. However, this would be an unfair thing to compare to other directors to, as the other directors that I've mentioned before don't write their own movies, don't have as much screen control over the screenplay as Tarantino does. So as great as this dialogue is, and it's fucking amazing, I will have to discount it for the sake of this video. However, Tarantino has far more to offer as a director as opposed to just a writer. If Fincher's identity is all about subtlety, Tarantino's is all about exaggeration. Tarantino always uses bright, bold, contrasting colours in his scenes, usually in the form of the protagonist's outfit. You know, he's got some of the most iconic outfits of all time, like the bride's outfit in Kill Bill 1 and 2, Django's blue suit in Django Unchained. The contrasting colour between the characters highlights to the viewer the contrast that the characters have with each other on a personal level. So, for example, the whole pipe scene, which has been broken down so much in Inglourious Basterds. Tarantino is also a master of focus switching. Take the opening scene from Inglourious Basterds, like we just mentioned. We first see two men discussing a family of Jews who had fled Nazi-occupied France. As this discussion gradually becomes more and more tense, we are shown that the escaped Jews are actually hiding under the floorboards of the farmer's house. The objective of the viewer then shifts. They no longer want to know where the Jews are or not. They want to know whether Hans Landa will be able to find them out or whether they will escape. Then later on in the movie, the story's focus switches again between several primary antagonists. First we focus on Hans Landa, then Aldo Rain, then Archie Hickox, and then finally we go back to Shoshana, the member of the Jewish family who escapes. And this is something we see a lot in his movies, even in Pulp Fiction, in Reservoir Dogs, in Django to a certain extent. We always have this switch of narrative. Even though we do have one central character that's often the focus, there's often several characters that are delved into individually rather than just having a whole story. And he always does this in a way where it'll be a crucial moment in the movie where he'll then go back and highlight this character and why they're significant. This constant switching of perspective helps to keep the viewer uneasy and on the edge of their seat. He's one of the masters at keeping you enthralled in what's going on in what you're seeing, because you never know when a character could change all of a sudden, because it's so ingrained in our mind that Tarantino will flip the script at any moment, and all of a sudden a character we thought was good will turn bad, or a character we thought was bad will turn good. You know, like when Landa strangles the actress to death in Inglourious Basterds, or when Butch kills Vincent in Pulp Fiction. You know, the list just goes on, and this keeps us invested in everything that is being said and done in a scene to make sure that we can try and piece things together and figure out what's going to happen next. All of these directors have a signature identity that could be immediately related to them by the viewer, and this is something that I believe that all aspiring filmmakers should look to replicate. Being unique in the way you craft your own films. You know, have a specific identity, however, don't be so repetitive in the way you do it. Your identity should take time to be perfected, but when you have it perfected, any casual fan of film should be able to identify that this is your work. If it's done enough, it almost becomes a part of your person. It becomes a part of your philosophy as who you are and what you believe in. You know, how you tell the story, how you direct the focus, how you colour the scene, how you get actors to stand, how you get actors to talk, how you get them to walk, how you get them to do anything. It always becomes a part of who you are. And if identity can be formed correctly, it can lead to making some pretty fucking fantastic films. And I think this should be the legacy of a director that will be looked and admired for generations to come. All of these iconic movies that all have this staple of what makes the director great. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. Comment down below if you want more of this like sort of in-depth, detailed, analytical stuff as opposed to just sort of the memes that I've been posting. Also, make sure you comment anything you want me to see, you want me to do next time. Maybe you want me to do an individual deep dive on the directors. Maybe you want me to do a sort of ranked video like Carsten Runquist does for directors, or genres, or specific franchises. I'll do whatever you want. This is your channel and you can produce this. I'm happy to make whatever kind of content. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Peace out, guys.